Hello everyone, it's Carol at Aakash Journals. Thanks for joining me this afternoon. I'm going to make a start on completing this journal. I will put the link in the description box down below so that you can see the part 1 video on this journal. And this is what I was planning to do to store all my guest checks that I completed last year as part of the first 50 stack challenge. Now I'm not going to go through and explain what I've done so far. That's all detailed in the first video for you. But very quickly, as you can see, this is an old encyclopedia that I've roughly cut down to size that I plan to use for the cover. And these are my signatures. And as you can see, I've just got a little bit of fabric down the edge of each one to reinforce the pages. Now I'm going to lift the first one out, close this back up and just pop it off to one side. So as I say, this is one of my signatures. This is the first one. I've left the first page blank because I'm going to put something on here that outlines what the contents are, namely that they're altered guest checks that I completed as part of the 50 stack challenge. Something as simple as that. Inside, I've just created a vellum pocket on each page, and again, this is all very rough and ready. It's not finished. I'm thinking that I will take you along with me from here on in to show you this journal reaching completion. I'm hoping that I can do it in one video, but it might be two, I don't know. So as I said, I created a pocket along the bottom of each page just to slot my guest checks in. Now these pockets aren't finished off, they're just a piece of vellum that has been folded over. They are glued at the moment, but I'm planning to stitch each page, and when I do that, this flap at the front of the pocket will be stitched down. I wanted it folded over to give an extra thickness. This is really lovely thick vellum, but I wanted double thickness because obviously they're going to take some wear and tear as things get pushed in and out as I look at these over time. And the other thing is that I wanted along the bottom, underneath each guest check, details of what the respective prompts were for my guest checks. So for the first one, the prompt was red. I want a label down here saying red. This one was paint. Another one here obviously saying paint. Got a list here off to one side, and this is a list of all the prompts that I will be putting across the bottom. I'm a little bit undecided at the moment whether I am going to print the prompts onto some more of this fabric that I've edged the pages with to reinforce that fold, or whether I'm going to do a little collage, maybe do the prompts on card and then put a little piece of the material behind. And I'm leaning towards the latter at the moment. I'm not too sure until I see how well I can get these to print out on the fabric. But before I start doing that, I have one last pocket, and if I flip this signature over, I have one last pocket down here that I haven't created, and I didn't create this one so that in the previous video I could show what my pages looked like before I put the pockets on. So what I need to do first, before I do anything else, is just to create another one of these pockets and glue it down there. I've got a scrap of the vellum here, and if you're interested in what vellum I'm using this parchment paper, 155 GSM, as you can see, product code PT049. I got it off Amazon, but the supplier is papertent.com, and as always I'll put the information in the description box below the video so you don't have to pause the video to try and get those details down. Okay, so I've cut myself a piece that is 8 centimeters in height, which is about 3 1/8 in inches, and then width-wise 7 inches or nearly 17.5 centimeters. Fold it in half, put a crease along the top and glue it onto my page. Now this is marginally a slither smaller than the width of my page. Making sure that the folders at the top, I'm only going to put a smidgen of glue on the back portion along the edge here and along the bottom here. Just a tiny little smidgen of glue, because I'm going to be stitching over this, so I'm not too bothered. I am going to quickly remove these, flip it over like that, and pop it down on my page and just give it a little burnish. So that's that little job done, 30 seconds worth of work. And now I can add these two. Might be pushing it, I am pushing it a little bit, especially on that side. It hadn't quite grabbed, but that's fine. So these two will just slide in there. And I do have a little bit of wriggle room. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go and print out my prompts. I'm going to try them on the fabric first. If I don't like that, then I'm going to print them out on some paper and start doing some little collages to go on the bottom of each of these pockets. So I will be back when that's done. Very quickly before I go, you might have remembered, if you saw me do the 50 stack challenge, that when we came to the one for mark making and I made 3 covers and I didn't know which one I was going to glue onto my guest check. This was one of the leftover ones. The other one I gave away, but this was a leftover one, and I thought I would make use of it. Got some scraps there. I thought I would make use of it on the front of my journal. Very similar to what I did for my Marguerite Miller Collage Weekly Planner assignments last year. And let me just grab that for you so that you can see what I'm talking about. So this is that book that I've just mentioned, and this cover is not, or this closure rather, is not new at all. Everybody is doing it, but I have to say it is a particular favourite of mine. Ever since I saw it, I loved it. So here's my book, here's my journal rather, and I don't actually need a closure on this. I've got a bit that needs gluing down there. I don't actually need a closure on this. It will stay nice and closed like this, but I do like having this. So I'm going to do the same sort of closure on my guest check journal as I've done on this one. I've printed out the prompts onto just some lightweight cardstock, and as you can see it's white. The reason I've chosen white is because I'm trying to keep my journal, apart from the guest checks that is, keep my journal fairly neutral, because there's a whole variety of colours and textures going through my journal on the guest checks alone. So I'm trying to keep everything else fairly neutral as a good background to show them off against. So that's why I've chosen the white, and now I'm going to cut these out and ink round the edges. The prompts are all finished now. I've layered them up onto a little bit of fabric. It's a little bit of book page, vintage book page behind, and as you can see I've just inked round the edges of the white cardstock. So they're all done, ready to go on my pages. So I'm thinking I will have them something like that, just off to the left hand side and also off a little bit to the right hand side like that. 1 or 2 of them are quite long, as you can see. This one where the prompt was corrugated cardboard, that's quite a long prompt, but I'm okay with the different sizes. That's not going to bother me, and I'm quite pleased how these look. I decided I wasn't going to stitch round the outside of them. I didn't want them to be too fussy, so they're ready to go. And I've also backed onto another piece of fabric the wording that I want to have at the front of my journal, and as you can see again I've backed it with some vintage book text, and that's going to go in the front like that. It has turned out a little bit bigger than I originally imagined. So perhaps having something as big as this is the way to go, even though I didn't originally intend it. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to stitch around this to give some interest, and I'm also going to start working through my pages, taking out the guess checks and stitching all the way around my pages on my sewing machine. All my pages have been stitched round, and I've also stitched around this piece with a couple of rows of messy stitching on my sewing machine, and I'm liking the look of that. I'm not particularly liking how my stitching has worked on my pages. The problem that I had was this lovely vellum is so thick, and as you know, I doubled it up for each pocket, so I've got 2 layers here and another 2 layers here, and my sewing machine was struggling a little bit to go through it neatly without leaving the usual raised holes on the reverse that you usually get when you stitch paper. Now, with lighter weight vellum and also with paper, you can smooth those down just going over it with your bone folder, but because this vellum was so thick, it wasn't really working particularly well. So I resorted to another trick that I've used on several of my journals when I want to get a nice finish on both sides, and that is to stitch it on one side all the way around, flip it over, smooth out the raised reverse stitches, and then stitch it again on the reverse side, and then flip it over and use my bone folder, and it does give you a neater finish to your stitching on both sides. But even having done that, I'm not particularly happy with the stitching. Also on the first one, which is this one, I stitched all the way around each page. So I stitched around this page, then flipped it over and stitched around the other side, which gave me these lines of stitching down the middle there. Now, I really didn't like those at all, and I will be covering that up with some fabric, some more of this fabric. I've got some gorgeous handwritten text. So what I'm going to do, behind each of my labels, I'm going to add a portion of this and try and detract the eye from the stitching that's there. And also I'm going to add portions, just roughly torn portions, on my pages, just so that it ties in with the pocket. Now, this isn't at all the look that I was after. I was after a very, very plain, functional background and pockets with no decoration. I'm hoping that by adding this, that it's not going to make it all too fussy. It still will keep it a little bit neutral. So I'm going to go away and start doing that. I'm back with a little update. I've gone through the whole of my signatures, putting in a piece of fabric down the middle there. Now, this is the first signature, and if you remember, I had that line of stitching which I didn't like, so I've covered it up with some fabric. And then because I've done it on the first signature, I decided that I would go all the way through each of the signatures and put some down the center so that it's all uniform and matches. As you can see, I've got various scraps of that handwritten French exercise book, and I just put these on my pages. There we go. And they're just clipped in place. And the reason for that is because I've made a decision to use some book page behind these pieces of French exercise book. And as you can see, I've got a piece in place here, and what I'm going to try and do is get the text in and also a little bit of the cream edging so that it ties in better with these labels that are now glued in place at the bottom. I'm actually thinking about putting some texture paste on my pages as well. I've gone all the way through my pages gluing the collage pieces down, and I've also gone over the top with some texture paste, and I'm hoping you can see that. And the texture paste I've used is this Ranger Distress texture paste, the opaque. I have 3 or 4 different types of texture paste or embossing paste in my stash, and I've been using some of the book pages to test it out, and the best result I got was using this because it made it stand out a bit better. The stencil I used was this Tim Holtz mini layering stencil, and it's set number 25, and as you can see there's 3 different types at the bottom. I used this one, which was that rose design there. Whilst that's drying, I'm going to get on and do some work on the actual main cover itself. But before I do that, let me just show you the back page. If you remember, didn't have a vellum pocket because it was a spare page. So I've just done a collaged piece which I've glued onto the back inside the stitch lines, and again I've put some more texture paste on that. So along with the other pages, I'm just going to pop this off to one side to let the texture paste harden and get on with doing the actual cover. Last time you saw this spine piece was attached to the cut down front and back part. So all I've done is I've just cut it away. I needed to create a much bigger spine for this one, so I've gone with this, which is just shy of 4 inches by 7 3/4, and in centimeters that is 10 by 19.5. As you can see, the cover is pretty thick, and I haven't got any grey board that thick. The thickest I've got is this one. So what I've done is I've cut out 2 pieces which are near as damn it as wide as this cover, and I'm going to glue these 2 pieces together. There we go, probably complete overkill, but it doesn't matter. That will help that sit nicely and adhere. So I'm going to pop that off to one side, and like the texture paste, let that adhere. And I could actually glue this down here where the cover is coming away, but if I did that, because this has got a gloss finish to it, I would actually be sanding this down to get a really good grip for my cover to adhere. So I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take this layer away, and I'm just going to cut that back or trim it off so that I've got a nice neat edge there. The 2 pieces making up my spine are nicely glued together, and in the end I decided to take away all the coverings on the back and front cover. It's left a little bit of a rough texture, not too bad. I want to seal down all these little loose edges that I've got there, and I'm going to do that just using some heavy matte gel. Whilst the hardback covers are off drying along with the pages, you might have wondered why I chose to use this heavy matte gel by Golden for sealing the hardback cover. No other reason other than it is a large pot that I've had in my stash for a while, and it is beginning to go off, and I wanted to use it. My normal preference and my normal go-to would always be the Ranger Multi-Matte Medium. That is absolutely brilliant as a glue and as a sealant. So I just thought I'd mention that. And now for the actual cover itself. Well, you would have heard me mention a few times that I have a lovely friend called Jeff, morning Jeff, who does the most amazing paintwork with normal packaging paper, and it's absolutely fabulous. And he sent me this very recently, and it's absolutely gorgeous. Lovely shades of blues and browns and greens, and then shot through with gold, and I absolutely loved it. But what I loved even more for the project I've got in mind was the reverse, because it's a little bit more subtle, softer for what I actually wanted. But I still have plenty of this left over, and I will be using it in other projects. But for this book cover, I wanted to use the reverse. So let me bring it in. This is the piece I've chosen, and I'm looking at the monitor in front of me, and it really is not doing this justice in the slightest. The colour tones on here are just fabulous, and the actual paper is an off-white, almost a creamy colour, which blends in so well. So I'm using this piece as my journal cover, and because it is packaging paper, it is incredibly thin and wouldn't do as a journal cover at all. If you see, there's a couple of little rips there. So for a book cover, this wouldn't work on its own. So what I did was, if I flip it over, you can see I have backed it with some medium weight linen fabric. Now, to adhere the wrapping paper onto the fabric, I've applied Bondaweb. And then once the fabric was adhered to the paper, I've put another layer of Bondaweb on here. And the result of doing that is that it makes, as you can see, my paper absolutely fluid, flexible, and very, very strong. I will heat react the Bondaweb on the actual fabric itself to adhere it to the book boards. So I'm just going to trim it down to the size of my fabric. The reason I've left this edge here was just so that you could see what I'd done. This piece that I've got here is a really good size for me to cover my pieces of board with, and also my spine. So I've got plenty here, and I will be trimming it down a little bit more. And the joy of Bondaweb is it stops your fabric from fraying as well, so that's a bit of a bonus. I wanted to make sure this is going to be stuck down very well onto my book boards, because they are so thick from that medical encyclopedia that I won't be stitching through my main cover with my sewing machine. I wouldn't get it through the actual book boards themselves. What I'm doing here is I am just spacing my boards, my backboards and my spine together, making sure that they're lying top and bottom, and I've just moved that. I've got a little spacer here, making sure that my gap is roughly central, and I'm just running some tape down the centre of it. I'm just going to cut off the excess with my scalpel here, or my X-Acto knife I should say. Get rid of that excess up there, and give it a good burnish with my bone folder to make sure it's well and truly adhered. And I'm going to do exactly the same on the other side, again making sure that that gap is left. Flip it over, and I'm just pulling the excess over to the inside of the cover, and again burnishing that down, burnishing the edges down as well. I'm trying to keep it as smooth as I can. There we go. Just reinforce the crease that I want, and there's my cover. And that will be nice and secure, because it will be covered not only with the paper but the fabric on the outside, which will protect that, and on the inside there'll be the material from the hidden spine as well, so it'll all be nice and secure. But this is pretty strong packaging tape that I've used. I've got my boards laid out onto my fabric, and I've made sure this bottom edge is level. I'm using my spacer bar again just to measure from the bottom of my cover to the edge of my paper, or my cover, so that when I turn it over I've got a really good overlap here, which is what I want. And I'm just checking that all the way along. What I'm going to do now is mark the same overlap at the top. I've got Frickson marker pen here, and I'm just using the edge of my boards or my cover to mark my line. And now I'm going to trim off the excess above it. And I'm not going to throw this away. I can use that for all sorts. I could even use it as a belly band on something. So I'm going to keep that to one side. And that's my cover now. So this back in place. Check that I've got it where I want it. Yeah, that's fine. And now I'm going to go in and I'm going to start doing my overlap, gluing it down, trimming across my corners, same as you do with all bookbinding, and I will be back when that's done. So my cover's nearly finished now. As you can see, it's happily glued on here, and I've ironed over the top. Once the glue was dry, I ironed over the top to activate the bonder web, so I've got doubles adhesion holding my fabric in place. This is what it looks like on the inside, and around the edges here I used double-sided tape as well as glue, so I really have a double jeopardy working on that. I've put some clear glossy not clear glossy accents, clear gesso over the tape here, which is going to help me with adhesion in due course. So where do I go from here, or what am I thinking of? Well, I'm thinking that I would like to line the inside of my book with fabric. So not this complete piece of cloth, but where my spine comes there. So have a piece of cloth like that inside my book, because I think that will go really nice against the actual signatures. So let me grab one and show you what that looks like. So this is what it would look like against my first page, and I love it because this is the fabric that I've used throughout and backed this piece with. So I think it will tie in nicely, but you can probably see that I have an issue here, and that's because I've got fabric and paper working here. So I've got a bit of a lip there, and it's actually showing through this fabric. Now I can't double up this fabric because I haven't got any more of it than this particular strip. I have a couple of options that I can use to resolve this. Obviously I don't want this fabric on here with a lip like that. So I could take a piece of card or some more of this paper that I've used for the cover and just lay that over the top, glue it down, and then put my fabric back in place, and that will help mask the lip that I've got there. It won't get rid of it completely because on its own this paper is very thin, as I've mentioned previously. I could put some card down there that is thicker in a cream colour, and that would do a better job, but I'm actually liking how this looks tucked in there. Or the other option is I could actually glue down my fabric directly onto this, ignore the lip there, and then take a piece of this paper, not this piece, but one that goes nearer to the edge, leave those frayed edges because I really like those, and I could put a piece of this paper in there like that. Now it goes incredibly well with the fabric because of the colour of the background, and this is, whilst it's busy, it's soft. And I'm quite liking that. So which of the options at the moment I'm going to go with, I'm not too sure. So whilst this is still settling itself down, I'm going to wait till this is absolutely dry before I try teasing these creases into place. So whilst that's doing its thing there, what I thought I would do is to get on with sewing in my signatures. So if I pop this to one side, and let's pop it just up there, what I've done here is I've got two pieces of card that I have glued together. They were greetings cards, so I've glued them together, and this is going to form my hidden spine. So it is fractionally narrower than my spine here and fractionally smaller in height than my actual cover. And I've marked out a grid on here. The vertical lines are going to be my signatures, so there's 7 of those, and the horizontal lines are stitch lines. Where they intersect, I will put holes, and I will use that to do my 5-hole pamphlet stitch to form my hidden spine. But before I do that, I want to cover this. So I've got another piece of that fabric, which I've put some Bondaweb on the back, and I'm just peeling away the backing. And what I will do is I will punch holes at all these intersections, and then I will put my fabric over the top, apply the iron so that it sticks down, and I will then use the holes that are visible on the other side to punch through my fabric when it's adhered down. I've left a little bit at the top, and that's going to be ironed over the top like that to give me a neater edge. Ideally, I would have given myself a little bit more than I have done, but I haven't got any more of this fabric going spare, so I can't do that. So I'm going to get on and get that done, and I will be back when when this is glued in and my signatures are stitched to this bit. So my signatures are all stitched in now to create one text block, and there's plenty of room in here for when the altered guest checks go in, and this is what it looks like on the reverse. I put a little bit of glue where I made each knot, and that will help hold those knots in place, even though this is wax thread. And as you can see, I've also put some strips of double-sided tape over my threads as well. Now this is ready to go inside my cover, and I've been working the cover gently to make sure that it will bend quite nicely so that I will have a nice edge on either side of my spine. So this will go into the spine like that, and then these flaps will be glued down. What I have decided is I'm going to cut another piece of paper like this. I'm going to put that in there like that. I'm going to use some double-sided tape, red double-sided tape, to adhere my fabric on either side, or my flaps on either side of the text block. Then I'm going to cut myself a better fitting piece of paper to go inside here, and then I've decided that I will go with, if I can just lay that in place, the fabric inside and keep it all nice and neutral inside. So obviously this piece of fabric will need cutting off. My journal cover is finished now, and as you can see, she's quite a wide journal, and all I've done is I've just put an elastic band around it. I'm going to show you how I've constructed the closure in just one second, but let me just give you a look inside. Obviously there are no guest checks inside. I've got a little bit of puckering there, but I'm fine with that. I may well do something down there at some stage. I could always put a little bit of book text to pick up this if I wanted to down there, or even have a little pocket, and that would hide that. These are what my pages look like. Let me move this to one side. So this is what my empty pages look like. I've got quite a big gap between each of my signatures, and that is so that there's plenty of room when the guest checks are in their pockets. So they have all got a little bit of texture paste, some of the handwritten exercise book, the French one, a little bit of the book page. They've got the labels down at the bottom. I stitched each signature into the spine individually, and rather than ending the 5-hole pamphlet stitch in the centre of each signature, I ended it on the reverse, and I covered it over, as you saw, with some double-sided tape. So this is what it all looks like now. Just very quickly flipping through for you. Oops, got a loose thread there. Needs pulling or snipping. Let's snip it. There we go. And I have a spare page here, so I've just done some collaging on that. And there we go, that's what it looks like, and that's the back of my journal. So all I need to do now is to bring in my guest checks, which I've got tucked away here in this little box, and they've been there for a couple of weeks as I've been finishing off this journal. I'm going to populate my journal with my guest checks, and I've made a start on the closure, so let me just put that to one side. I've used some of this grey board, and this was the same stuff that I used for the spine, but when I used it on the spine you saw me double it up. I've kept a single layer of this, and I've covered it over with some more of the cover paper. I've inked around the edges, that's what it looks like on the reverse, and I've put one of the Holtz Idea-ology Hitch fasteners in that. I've taken the spare guest check from the week when we did some mark making, and I've just backed it with a little bit of the same fabric, and I'm going to attach this to the front. I'm just going to glue it on the front, but what I want to do first is I want to stitch all the way around the outside before I adhere this to it, and I want to attach some elastic. Now I'm not going to have my elastic, let me just unravel this, I'm not going to have my elastic like that where you can see the end. I have left a small portion down the side here. There you go, I can put my thumbnail in there. I've left a small portion, and I'm going to just slide this into that gap with a little bit of glue and then stitch all the way round. But I can't do that until I've put all my guest checks into my journal and I know exactly how much elastic I want to use. Here we go everybody, this is the journal finally finished, done and dusted. So this is the closure in place, and if I flip it round to the back or the spine you can see what it looks like, and again the back. It probably would have been better if I'd had some white flat elastic that I could have dyed so that it would have been more in keeping with the cover, but I didn't, and I didn't want to buy any, so I was making use of what I'd got in my stash, and it just unloops like that, like all these closures do. I'm just going to lift it away, put it off to one side, and just very quickly give you a very quick flip through of the journal with all the guest checks in place. So that's my little note saying what the challenge was all about. That's the first 4 guest checks, and the next ones, and they all sit quite nicely in their pockets. And those are the next ones, and those. And this will lie flat on my desk here, which is nice. It's just quite a big journal now with all the guest checks in place, and 1 or 2 of them just need a little bit of tweaking. Some of these guest checks are quite thick. This particular one is, because it's got several layers, and there and there, and this one is quite a thick guest check, as you can see, and never like that one. I don't know what possessed me. And then these and these. Oh, this one, punch. This altered guest check is missing. This one is the one that I used various punches to create a Yoda, and it's now wedged down between the wall and one of my units, low-level units in the craft room. I did notice a very naughty little kitten on there yesterday. She's obviously learned that she can leap that high now, and she was on there yesterday. I shooed her off and collected up all the guest checks which she'd managed to knock out of the little box that I was storing them in, and obviously one of them has found its way down between the wall and the unit, so I will need a helping hand to get that out, but that will be for another day. So I do have a gap in here at the moment, so let's carry on quickly. So there we go, and those. And because this one for ruffle was so chunky, what I've done is I could actually get the last one, the circle one, next door to it, but because I have some space here, I've given it a page on its own, and I'm just going to move that and just put it underneath, and then, as I keep saying, the collage on the last page. So there we go, everybody. Thank you so much for bearing with me and watching this come together. I have to say I'm very pleased with how it has come together. I wasn't sure about a lot of things, such as using the lovely wrapping paper that I had backed with fabric as my book cloth, if you will, and how wide this was going to get, because I'm not a great lover of very, very wide journals, but I'm happy with that, and I'm happy with how the signatures sit with all the altered guest checks inside. And that's the side view, if I close that up, and that's the bottom view. So thank you once again, everybody, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Until then, take care and happy crafting. Bye from me. Bye-bye.